Hello everyone and welcome to this week's edition of Votes for Schools, where you get to debate and discuss an interesting question or topic and then vote on it on the SurveyMonkey website. We'll just quickly look back at last week, where the question was, could you be a first settler on Mars? So actually 66%, so that's 2/3 of people said that no, and the main argument was that we should be focusing on saving our own planet before ruining another planet. Strong words there. Although some believed they'd like to be famous by being the first child to go on to Mars. So some interesting thoughts there. Okay, let's look at the news this week. So last week the government announced that they would be easing lockdown measures, with many shops opening in a few weeks, so things coming back to some sort of normality. Some year groups across the country have gone back to school this week after lots of discussion from government, schools and teachers. Really interesting one here. J.K. Rowling has released a free book, and she is releasing a chapter each day, and I started to read that yesterday. I'd urge you to go there. I'll put the link in the video description below. And finally, and relevant to today's question, hundreds of elephants that were kept in zoos in Thailand have been taken home to their village. The elephants were very happy to return. So that's keeping you up to date on the news. Right, before I say anything, I want to show you a compelling video. So there's a couple of questions for you to answer there, but I'm going to start by showing the video. If I can get it full screen. Why aren't you starting?
A snake's eyes aren't very good, but they can detect movement. So if the hatchling keeps its nerve, it may just avoid detection. Escape.
Okay, so you might recognise that scene, children, from Planet Earth with Sir David Attenborough. Fascinating scenes there, and showing true nature at work. Anyway, why are we talking about this? And we'll soon find out. The question this week is, should we shut down zoos? Something that has been debated over many, many years, and something we've done in year 6 before. Right now, zoos across the country are closed due to the lockdown, so they can't have any visitors. But because no one's buying any tickets, the zoos are running out of money. And they're saying that they're struggling to look after the animals because they don't have the money to buy food. The government has given them funding, but zookeepers are still worried about the future of their animals. Meanwhile, many animal lovers at home have been watching live zoo cameras and catching up about documentaries about the natural world. But what will happen in the future? Should zoos reopen, or is it time to shut them down permanently? Right, over the next few slides, you're going to learn more about animals living in zoos and about animals living in the wild. As you read through, I'd like you to create a tally chart as to which one you think is better for the animals living in the wild or living in a zoo. I'm sure you can all remember what a tally looks like, but there's an example for you there. The first zoo opened in ancient Egyptian times. The animals were given lots of land and were fed the best food Egyptians could find. People would come from all over Egypt to worship these animals. Since then, zoos have always looked after animals. They take care of sick animals and endangered animals from the wild, and try and make them better, sometimes keeping them in the zoos, but sometimes releasing them back into the wild when they are better. What do you think? Is that better than being in the wild or in a zoo? However, wild animals are not designed to live in zoos, and lots of people say it's not fair to take animals away from their natural habitat and keep them in a different place. Taking animals away from their habitats can cause more problems for animals that are left behind, because it breaks up their families, meaning that there's not enough food for other animals. So maybe if that animal used to provide food for the family, so it can give problems to the animals outside of the zoo. But is life in the wild really better? Animals can unfortunately be hunted by humans and eaten by other animals. Plus, injured animals without care might not heal properly. So we have experts in zoos who help the animals to heal. Some people argue, though, that this is natural and we shouldn't get involved. They say that it is better to be in the wild than to be kept in enclosures which could be too small or boring for the animal. Zoos can also be dangerous to animals and humans. Steve Irwin was an Australian zookeeper who died after he was injured by a stingray while filming his TV show about animals. So a few years ago he was quite famous, and he used to hold some of the most dangerous animals in the world, and sometimes he'd say, "I've just been bitten on the arm by this snake," because he was an Australian zookeeper. But unfortunately he did pass away by looking after the animals. There's another example here of a 3-year-old child who climbed into the gorilla enclosure at a zoo. A gorilla was stressed by all the shouting and screaming and dragged the boy up a ladder. So the zookeepers killed the gorilla because they wanted to keep the boy safe. Finally, many people argue that humans have changed the wild through farming, cutting down forests and building cities, making it harder for wild animals to live. There is also much more pollution and waste in the wild which can harm animals, whereas zoos create safe spaces for animals to live without these dangers. You can see that iconic picture there, the plastic bag around the turtle. So add up your scores and see which you think is better at this stage, being in the wild or being in a zoo. We need to look at the different animals involved in this though, because it might not be the same for all animals. We're going to look at the next few slides at some animals and learn more about them. For each one, you need to decide, is it better if they live in the zoo or if they lived out in the wild? So, first one up, you've got the African lion, which is a vulnerable animal, meaning it's not quite endangered yet. It lives in grassy and open areas in warm countries and eats zebras and deers. They sleep for 16 to 20 hours a day. Sounds a bit similar to you, some of you lot. It's threatened by hunters, poachers, and not having enough food. They are dangerous. Interesting fact, they are the only cats to live in groups. Living in the wild, it says they live from 12 to 15 years. But in a zoo, 20 years. Do you think it's better for the lion to live in a zoo or in the wild? Think of all the information there. Now we've got the Asian elephant, which is an endangered species that lives in forests in warm countries, and they eat lots of leaves, branches, grass and fruit, so they're not meat eaters. In captivity, they get 3 to 7 hours sleep, but only 2 hours in the wild. Their threats are from deforestation, so cutting down the woods, and poachers. These animals aren't dangerous. And it's a fact that the population of elephants has declined by 50%. That's half compared to 75 years ago, so 1945. In a zoo, it says they live for 17 years. In the wild, it says they can live up to 60 years. Where do you think an elephant should stay? Onto the Emperor penguin, which is nearly an endangered creature, and they live in the Antarctic ice, where it sometimes gets as cold as minus 60 degrees Celsius. They eat fish, squid and krill and sleep for up to 21 hours. Threats at the moment are not enough food or ice to live on, disease and being eaten by other animals. They are not dangerous. Interestingly, they can dive up to 1,850 feet. That's a very deep way to dive. How long do they live? In the wild, 15 to 20 years. In a zoo, 40 years. Now looking at this wonderful creature, the giant panda, which is vulnerable, and they live in the mountains in China. They can eat for 12 out of 24 hours in a day, so spend half of the day eating bamboo. They sleep for 10 hours a day, and they have a low birth rate, so the mother doesn't have many children in their lifetime. The animals are not dangerous despite their size. And here's an interesting fact. Most of our information on pandas comes from studying ones in the zoos, as wild ones are so rare and hard to find. In the wild, they live for 15 to 20 years, but in a zoo, up to 30 years. Ooh, scary creature here, the king cobra. They're seen as vulnerable. They live in forests and grassy areas in China, India and Southeast Asia. They eat lizards, eggs and small mammals. They're threatened by cutting down forests and being taken or killed by humans. They are dangerous. They're actually one of the most venomous snakes on the planet, but are also known to be very shy. In the wild, they live for up to 20 years. We don't know how long they live for in a zoo, though. And I think this is the final one, the orca. They live in cold coastal waters and sleep for 1 to 6 hours a day. They eat fish, penguins, and other marine animals. The threat is that they get kept in small enclosures, but they're not dangerous. Interesting fact, they can swim 40 miles a day and dive 100 to 500 feet. They are very quick swimmers. In the wild, they live from 50 to 80 years. In a zoo, 15 to 30 years. So, what do you think? We're going to see some facts about zoos and different animals, and it's time to see your opinion. If for each of those, use your feet to show whether you agree or disagree. So run to the side of the left of the room if you think yes, to the right of the room if you think no. Zoos help look after animals that would die in the wild. We can't shut them down. Yes or no? It doesn't matter where animals live, they will still need to eat each other to survive, so they should do it naturally. Humans have destroyed animals' homes. It is our responsibility to look after them now, and zoos help do that. To look after animals, we should stop destroying their habitats, not just create fake ones for them. Zoos are the best way to learn about and understand animals. We wouldn't know all the things we do today if we didn't keep them and study them. You can't just shut zoos down. The animals are used to living there and wouldn't know how to survive in the wild now. Okay, time for you to vote, children. So look at the options there. Should we shut down zoos? Yes or no? We've gone through some of those factors. Discuss this with someone at home or a friend. That would be fantastic to do. You might have differing opinions, but that's okay. And you're able to vote here. I'll put the link in the video description notes. Children, if you want an additional activity, you can design your own zoo on an A4 piece of paper. You haven't got any of the problems you've learnt about. You can do what you like. It can be the ideal zoo. It can be as big as you like. What would it look like if you created the ideal zoo? There's a few things for you to think about there. Okay, that's it for today's Votes for Schools. Hope you enjoy, get voting, and speak to you soon.